Greetings world. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. We don't forgive. We don't forget. Expect us. We are coming to you today to make an emergency announcement with an urgent warning, one we hope all Americans will heed. According to our sources, the time to prepare has arrived. We have finally identified a network of elite operatives who have wormed their way into many of the most powerful financial institutions on Earth. This list includes the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, the United Nations, and every central bank in the G20, including our own Federal Reserve. When the signal sounds, we predict that this network will pull the plug on the global financial system, that will cause every bank, brokerage, and business to go dark in a massive coordinated attack. Their latest hit list, if you will, includes some 5,967 banks, such as Wells Fargo, Citigroup, and JP Morgan Chase, but they won't stop at the banks. These elite operatives will move to take control of approximately 3,800 asset managers as well. We expect to see them seize control of BlackRock for nearly $5 trillion, Fidelity for $2 trillion, Vanguard for $3 trillion, and UBS and State Street for a combined $5 trillion or so. When the freeze comes, citizens nationwide will lose access to their money almost instantly. No cash will be allowed to enter or exit the system without the network's approval, and Donald Trump's presidency will not likely survive the chaos about to ensue. Before we get to the details about this, here is a quick reminder. In September of 2006, the CIA circulated a warning among its senior staff. Our predictions at the time even appeared in the CIA's official journal, Studies in Intelligence. That material remains classified to this day. However, on August 24, 2007, we shared the same warning with you, the citizens. We even supplied a plan for averting the crisis called Proposal to Obtain and Manage Information in Response to Capital Markets Crisis. Unfortunately, Washington failed to act on our warnings in time. The result was the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. We are about to experience a radically new kind of crisis, one that will freeze the financial system, leading to global chaos. The next financial crisis will not be merely a bigger version of the 1998 and 2008 crises. It will be qualitatively different. It will encompass multiple asset classes on a global scale. It will exhibit inflation not seen since the 1970s, insolvency not seen since the 1930s, and exchange shutdowns not seen since 1914. State power will be summoned to contain panic. Capitalism will be discredited once and for all. Not only will the coming crisis destroy more investor wealth than 2008, not only will it last much longer than the Great Depression, this crisis will be historic for another reason. And we are talking about this network of elites using the crisis for cover. At the appointed hour, they'll launch their attacks, and the financial system will go dark worldwide. Trillions will vanish instantly, and in many cases permanently. Hundreds of millions of Americans will be cut off from their own money for months or even years. This will be the biggest confiscation of wealth in history, no doubt. Heist 9 is coming. Time to wear warm clothes. This must sound hard for some of you to believe. As you may know, BlackRock is now the largest asset manager on the planet. It directly manages $5 trillion in assets, and it oversees another $11 trillion through its Aladdin platform. That means one firm controls more money than the GDPs of China, Russia, and Japan combined. As we started to investigate what the hell was going on, we started connecting the dots. A pattern emerged. It revealed a network of more than 189 individuals positioned inside the world's major financial institutions. Some of them hold senior positions inside the IMF, World Bank, and every central bank in the G20, including our own Federal Reserve. These elites share one vision, and they're about to make it a reality. That vision is one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. They've worked for years behind the scenes preparing to realize that vision. They've literally rigged the laws of international finance. Everything is basically in place right now, and there's essentially no way to stop this from happening. When the crisis hits, they'll flip the switch, freezing the global financial system. That will give them time to reset the world economy according to their vision. As the coming crisis unfolds, President Trump will be powerless to stop it. In fact, Trying to stop them would probably weaken the president's power altogether. Basically, the elites want to classify BlackRock as too big to fail. The technical term is Systemically Important Financial Institution, or SIFI. That designation normally applies to banks, such as Bank of America. If your bank gets the SIFI label, it means the government will bail you out first in a crisis, but it also means you must turn over control of your bank until the crisis subsides. In this case, they are trying to reclassify BlackRock, an asset manager, as too big to fail. If they succeed, they'll be able to freeze BlackRock when the crisis hits. BlackRock clients won't be able to sell, they won't be able to buy either, their accounts will go dark indefinitely, and the elite operatives will take control of BlackRock's assets remotely via the internet. Our research shows that their ICE-9 plan goes much deeper than that. So what does ICE-9 mean exactly? It's a reference to the Kurt Vonnegut novel Cat's Cradle. In the book, a mad scientist creates a new form of water molecule called ICE-9. When it comes in contact with other water molecules, it freezes them at room temperature. One drop of ICE-9 can freeze the whole ocean. That's what these elite operatives are about to do to the world economy. More than 189 elite agents have slowly wormed their way into leadership positions across the board. They now sit at or near the head of the IMF, the World Bank, and even our own Federal Reserve. They also control much of what happens at the central banks of China, Russia, India, Brazil, Canada, and Europe. As you know, these institutions form a kind of global superstructure. It forms a kind of snare net encircling all nations. Their leaders aren't democratically elected. They're not accountable to you and me. They're beyond the reach of government and citizens, and yet they hold the fate of the global financial system in their hands. To get a sense of how they operate, imagine an array of floating spheres. One sphere is labeled IMF, one is labeled Fed, one is labeled Bilderberg, one is labeled Wall Street, one is labeled central banks, one is labeled intelligence agencies, one is labeled media, and so on. The elites inhabit all of these spheres, and together the network forms a kind of 3D Venn diagram. As I see it, regardless of what sphere they inhabit, the elites all share the same vision: one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. All of their actions are geared toward moving that agenda forward. We've identified more than 189 individuals who are, in many cases, hiding in plain sight. Regardless, they all share the same vision: one world order, one world taxation, and one world money. A short list would include Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, IMF; Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England; Raghuram Rajan, Vice Chairman of the Bank for International Settlements; Haruhiko Kuroda, Governor of the Bank of Japan; William C. Dudley, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York; Agustin Carstens, Governor of the Bank of Mexico; Janet Yellen, Chairman of the Board of the Federal Reserve System; Mario Draghi, President of the European Central Bank; Zhu Min, former Deputy Managing Director of the IMF; Zhu Xiaoquan, Governor of the People's Bank of China; Robert E. Rubin, Chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. This a list of central bankers and other elites is just the tip of the iceberg. Of course, not one of these elites will tell us outright what's going on, but we have seen and heard enough to connect the dots for ourselves. Not long ago, one of their senior operatives, who is a leading economist who served as the chairman of the Federal Reserve during the last crisis, is considered one of the most influential minds in banking today. Of course, we are talking here about Ben Bernanke, who admitted that ICE-9 was real. Not long before that, another member of the network called Zhu Min, the former deputy governor of China Central Bank and until recently, deputy managing director of the International Monetary Fund, confirmed that fact. The alarm bells are ringing. The elite network is preparing to impose ICE-9 on millions of Americans. When the next crisis hits, the elites are planning to freeze the financial system, and they'll replace it with a new system, one not based on the US dollar. When that happens, we'll wake up to a very strange and disturbing new reality. First, we'll have gone to bed knowing that a massive financial crisis was underway. But when we wake up, we will find it has worsened and the contagion has spread worldwide. When you go to withdraw money, your ATMs will say, "Closed temporarily." When you go to sell stocks, your accounts will say, "Transaction not available." When you go to your local business, they will only accept cash, if they are still open at all. As citizens realize they're being barred from their money, riots will erupt. It's going to get really bad, really quickly. But we knew this would happen a long time ago. Worse of it, it wouldn't be technically illegal, because they've been quietly laying the groundwork for years. They've rigged the financial laws, changed the rules of the game to allow this to happen. The stage is set. They have the leverage in place. The lights are positioned. Now someone just needs to flick a switch and they'll impose ICE 9 rapidly. Again, all of this will be legal, because they've rigged the system in their favor. Here in the US, for example, Congress pushed through something called the International Emergency Economics Powers Act, or IEEPA. This allows the government to freeze accounts, assets, even whole institutions at will. The only condition is that there is some threat to national security with a foreign connection. Of course, with the global market, every financial crisis has a foreign connection. Any systemic crisis fits the bill. The thing is, when the next crisis hits, it's going to be so bad, President Trump won't have any choice but to go along with the elite's plan. Still hard to believe. You must be asking yourselves how these operatives could actually freeze a country's whole financial system. Well, the elites have been conducting a series of dry runs for years, leading up to ICE 9. Look at Cyprus for example. A few years ago the Cypriot economy was in trouble, especially the banks. The IMF stepped in and loaned Cyprus $10 billion, but the loan came with strings. Now pay attention, because this is precisely what they're going to do. But imagine it on a global scale. In exchange for the capital injection, the IMF demanded control over the Cypriot banking system. More specifically, the IMF froze the entire system, literally every bank in the country. They did that to ensure the IMF's demands were met, including strict capital controls. How did all this impact regular citizens? Their local ATMs went dark. Even the bank branches closed, permanently in some cases. Citizens could not withdraw cash. They couldn't even transfer funds from one account to the other. What came next? Wealth extraction on a grand scale. The IMF basically stole 6 to 10% of all the cash in the Cypriot bank accounts. How did the elites justify this? They called it a levy, the price citizens had to pay for their government's missteps. Keep in mind these asset confiscations were done at the balance sheet level with the institutions themselves. They never had to confiscate individual accounts. They froze every account by controlling a handful of the country's biggest banks. When the next crisis hits, we're going to see this here in the US and around the world, and it will be a highly coordinated global attack in the entire system simultaneously. Cyprus was a fairly isolated example of the globalist elites training to take over a nation's banking system for sure, but the same thing has happened in other places. It's happening in Greece right now. As you know, Greece has been navigating a massive debt crisis for years. In 2015, the IMF and their partners moved in to recapitalize Greece's banks. That just means they agreed to pump capital back into the stalled system, like priming a pump. In return, the IMF demanded control of the banks and citizens' individual accounts by default. Suddenly, Greek families weren't allowed to withdraw more than $460 per week. Imagine trying to pay your mortgage, gas, and groceries on less than $500, let alone your medical insurance. Of course, it led to widespread panic, rioting, and worse. That's exactly what we'll see on a global scale when the next crisis hits. This has been devastating to Greek citizens, but the reason for the elite to do this is control. To save itself from insolvency, Greece gave up its economical autonomy. The country is, for all intents and purposes, under the control of the European Central Bank and the IMF. Yet this top-down approach still hasn't solved the problem. As one Greek official told Reuters, the banks are in a deep freeze, but the economy is getting weaker. This is a microcosm of what we're about to see in America and around the world very soon. Unfortunately, Greece and Cyprus are not isolated examples. If you think governments tend to keep their hands off citizens' assets, you're mistaken. Elites have a long history of seizing control of people, institutions, and especially money. In February of 1917, for example, the Russian elite, who believed in a one-world workers' party, closed the stock market. Folks lost every penny. Their portfolios literally vanished overnight. The Russian exchanges remained closed for nearly 70 years. They reopened in January of 1992. Another example. In December of 1941, China closed its stock market without warning. It stayed closed for 4 years. The German government closed the stock market from July 1931 to April 1932 during a credit crisis. The list of examples goes on, and it goes back decades. So, could such a systematic freeze really happen here in the United States? Well, it already has happened multiple times, just on a smaller scale. In 1914, the Treasury Department shuttered the New York Stock Exchange for 4 months. Citizens couldn't buy or sell. They couldn't cash out. They couldn't do anything. England's elites did the same thing to the London Stock Exchange. We've seen more recent examples. 2. Trades on the New York Stock Exchange will abruptly stop. That is the moment the elites running the exchange will pull the plug. You won't be allowed to buy or sell a single share. Period. All activity will cease. The system will go dark. The pattern is the same with these freezes every time. You have some initial trigger or shock, then you have an immediate freeze, and the elites emerge with more control. You see it over and over. Shock, freeze, power grab, shock, freeze, power grab. With ICE 9, we'll see a global shock and a global freeze, and then we'll see the elites making a global power grab. Your money would have been locked into the system and your net worth would have been plummeting by the second. Meanwhile, you'll just be watching it happen, totally powerless to do anything about it. What we're seeing right now is the increase in the tempo. These many shocks and many freezes. They're coming faster and faster. You had 9/11, followed by a freeze. We had the flash crash of 2010, followed by a freeze. And in 2012 with Hurricane Sandy. For all those who still refuse to use bitcoins, their cash won't even be safe in the banks. In fact, the biggest bank freeze to date happened right here in the USA. Roosevelt signing Proclamation 2039 in 1933. With one stroke of his pen, FDR shuttered every bank in America. A few weeks later, he followed up by freezing the entire gold market. Executive Order 6102 literally outlawed citizens from owning gold. That freeze lasted 41 years until Gerald Ford ended that freeze in 1974. When the coming crisis hits, we'll see this repeated on a larger scale through the IMF, World Bank, and the Fed again. There will be nothing the White House can do. They have no direct control over the institutions that will carry this out. Not even the US President can control the Fed. Same with the IMF, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, or the People's Bank of China. When the crisis hits, it will likely be bad enough that Trump would get on board anyway, but it won't be enough to save his presidency. Even if he survives his first term, he won't get a second one. The coming crisis is unavoidable. Looking at the whole system, how the events interact with each other, we are screwed. All is interconnected at some point thanks to the internet we love, but this could bring our end too, sadly. In complexity terms, the system has entered into its critical state. The dominoes have begun to fall, and the next crisis is now inevitable. When that crisis hits, the elites will impose ICE 9, freezing the world financial system. When the coming crisis hits, elites will simply flip a series of switches, freezing the whole system very rapidly. Not even the Fed will be able to step in with more money printing to stabilize the system. Why? Because the people who run the Fed are truly believers in the vision. One world order, one world taxation, one world money. They've done their part to undermine the dollar, printing up $4.2 trillion in funny money, and all of it remains on the balance sheet. This is what pressure looks like in a complex system. Could the Fed print even more? Could it increase its balance sheets to $10 trillion, $20 trillion? Who knows? What we do know is the coming crisis will involve a catastrophic liquidity shortage. There won't be enough capital in the system to keep the world economy going. But the Fed won't be in a position to print more like they did the last time. That will leave the task of refloating the system to their fellow elites at the IMF. The IMF will take over and reset the monetary system, but not with. This is how eras end. This is how empires and presidencies end. To sum it up, first the initial domino event. Second, the dominoes will go from falling in an orderly way to a series of collapses. The markets will drop an estimated 60 to 70%. Gold will spike to $5,000 an ounce or higher. Treasury yields will go deep into negative territory, and that's when the elites will freeze the global financial system from the top down. Within 48 hours, people will lose access to their money. In some cases, access will terminate permanently. When the elites refloat the system, they won't do it with US, they'll do it with New World Order currency. I'm talking about the official currency of the IMF, the so-called special drawing rights, or SDRs. From its inception, the IMF intended for SDRs to replace the dollar as the new reserve currency. They've been planning for this event for many years, patiently waiting. When the next crisis hits, we'll see SDRs taking center stage and replacing the dollar for major transactions between banks, businesses, and billionaires. The IMF has already started issuing SDRs, denominated bonds, through the World Bank. When the next crisis hits, they'll refloat the world financial system in exactly this way, by issuing mountains of SDRs to governments and international institutions worldwide. The dollar will get left out of the new equation and Americans will wake up to a new post-dollar reality just 48 hours later. Here's the final twist. They won't be issuing any of these SDRs to individual Americans. We'll be left with, which will become like our version of the Mexican peso, or worse, monopoly bills. The end game is control and wealth extraction by the elites from us, the people. If you have one world money, one world central bank, the IMF, one world money and one world order, all overseen by the elites, they can then begin wealth extraction on a grand scale, not just through simple taxation, although a world taxation plan is in the works for after ICE-9 according to our sources. We are talking about all kinds of confiscation of assets. They'll come after every penny they can, through taxation, penalties, regulatory schemes, bank levies, trump-up criminal prosecutions, good old-fashioned thievery. In the end, neo-fascism around the world will rise, along with massive redistribution of wealth. The elites will come out as the big winners. Everyone else, for instance the rest of us, will come out devastated. We won't recover from this ultimate crisis. We're about to go through a one-way door. There is no turning back. This won't be about fixing the capitalist system, it will be about replacing it. All we're waiting for now is the big crash. My fellow human beings, ICE-9 age is coming. Prepare for it. Go Bitcoin, buy guns, and may the internet be with you. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.